Okay, Madam Clerk, please call the roll.
Alderman Kennedy, Alderwoman Flowers,
How you doing today? Okay.
Alderman Boyd,
Present.
Alderwoman Davis, present. Alderman Kotar,
Here.
Alderman Ogilvy, Alderwoman Boyd, here. Alderman Bosley,
Present.
Alderman Oldenburg,
Here.
Chairman Rhodey.
Present.
8 present, we have a quorum.
All right, we have 2 orders of business today, I guess 3, depending on how you count it. We have my resolution, which we'll be talking about today and probably the next week as well, and perhaps we may have one last meeting after that if we don't get it all done. Then we also have a board bill, and related to my resolution, we have a guest today from the St. Louis School Board. And we would like to hold the board bill till the end of our meeting so that we can have our guest speaker talk about the school system and their finances. Before we get into that, I want to make sure, little housekeeping things, 2 things that were emailed to members of the committee. The first was we had a draft summary report of our 2 public hearings. This was done by Bryant Robinson over at SLDC, and that was emailed out to you. And we also received our Director of Development, Otis Williams, received a letter from our comptroller regarding the resolution, and he had forwarded that to me as well. And I had in turn forwarded to all of you that, and I have passed out a copy of each of those for you in front of you today. The summary report, Bryant Robinson, who prepared this, actually left our employment and went out to Los Angeles or California. I'm not sure if it's LA or where at in California. But in the process of doing that, he did that the week I was away at my son's graduation. So I was reading this, and after he left, and I realized that he had me down as the 28th Ward Alderman. I want to let everybody know I did actually read the report. I just didn't have access to the PDF file, so I couldn't change that. So we wanted to get that out as fast as I could after I was able to read that. He was gone. But that is available for everyone to peruse as well. Then what I like to try to do, I know that we have these meetings and some people can't make all the meetings and we're all kind of moving quick and everything. And I like to take a second to just kind of reflect on where we are in the whole process. So at our first meeting, we talked about what our mission was as a committee, and I printed out a copy of that, and I sent it in front of everybody, and so we have a definition according to our rules, and then we have kind of my interpretation of the definition, which is we facilitate urban redevelopment to maintain the economic viability of our city and improve the economic well-being of our residents as measured by, and we don't have those filled in, those are performance measures, one of which we're going to start taking a look at today. And then to achieve this, we will use planning and zoning to optimize our development opportunities that can be derived from our unique transportation, location, institutional, and other community attributes and their competitive advantages. Number 2, use federal, state, and local economic incentives and programs to adjust the inefficiencies or weaknesses in our tax-to-service model. And 3, allocate community development block grant funds to, per their definition, ensure decent, affordable housing to provide services to the most vulnerable in our communities and to create jobs through expansion and retention of businesses. So that's kind of what our kind of mission is. So the first order of business that we've been trying to do outside of just reacting to the board bills that come in is an economic reform policy on how we're using our incentives. We had some hearings on those. And then I read through these, and I think we have a copy of the resolution in front of everybody. There was, 10 or 11 different recommendations. And as I was reading through these things, everybody's like they're overwhelmingly in favor of all the recommendations. Well, all the recommendations are more or less designed to reduce incentives. At the hearing, there was a lot of issues that kind of came up that weren't necessarily, well, I guess what they kind of revolved around, and as I started thinking about this, and this was a kind of very technocratic response to what the community's feeling, and unless you're a real numbers junkie, this stuff is like it's just mind-numbing. And what I thought was we begin thinking about translating what was said at these hearings, and I think they fall into issues of fairness. And so I wrote out what I thought they were, and this is not intended to be a monologue. But the fairness issues, as I heard them, whether at the public hearings or discussions with folks, focused kind of on three areas. First one being increase in values are pushing out less affluent minority residents, less affluent / minority residents, and changing the composition of neighborhoods. In other words, the gentrification issue. The second one is homeowners and businesses aren't paying enough in taxes, and some projects are getting too much incentives and hurting the ability to deliver services, especially the schools. And the third one was some neighborhoods aren't getting enough development. In other words, most of the development's being concentrated. And then I have a D on there, which isn't really an issue that was raised. It was an issue that was raised, but it wasn't. These three issues, how are they, with regard to the above issues, are these policy disproportionately impacting minorities or the poor? In other words, the equity lens aspect of all three of those issues. And so that was kind of my interpretation. Now, none of those things, and yet our kind of response to that is this kind of very quantitative, formulistic response. And if you look through those, almost all of them are directed at item number B, which is some homeowners and businesses aren't paying enough in taxes. In other words, let's cut the incentives. And they aren't really addressing very much, at least in my mind, the issues of gentrification or the issues of some neighborhoods not getting enough development. Some of them do a little bit on each of those, but not very much. And we don't really discuss too much in our recommendations, anything to do with equity lens. So what or at least not much. So I wanted to kind of throw that out there for everybody, and I'll come back to that in a minute, or at the end of the presentation. But what we're doing today is hearing from our school board. And one of the things that we should be concerned about, one of our performance measures is, how good of a job are we doing with education? Now, as we do these presentation, and I've met with the CFO of the school, Angie Banks, who is nice enough to have spent some time on this, and we've met several times. And it's important for us to remember, we do not set policy for schools. They are a separate political subdivision with their own governance. I think our responsibility, though, through our use of incentives and through our governance of other parts of the city is to at least be concerned about how much local contribution. So we can provide money, but we can't necessarily guarantee that, the results or anything else, but we should at least be conscious with the amount of money that we're providing. And so I thought that it would be good that we begin on these issues of fairness. I think in many ways our cities are addressing some of these things, A and C on this list that I handed out. I don't think we're necessarily doing a very good job at communicating that, though. And I think part of our job down here is to make decisions based on facts and not necessarily completely on emotion. But to do that, we need to go ahead and develop measures and documentation of what's going on. So much of, I think, our work over the next year or so will be trying to assemble all the information from all these different parts of city government in a report that we can go ahead and begin looking at annually to determine if we are making progress on a variety of these different fronts. So with that as a backdrop, I don't know if anybody has any questions or comments, but if not, are there any in what I've said so far? Or? Okay. Why don't we go ahead and turn it over to Angie, the CFO of the public school system, who's also now on the TIF commission. Is that not correct?
Yes. Good morning.
Morning.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak. As mentioned, I am the Chief Financial Officer and Treasurer for the St. Louis Public Schools and a new TIF Commissioner. I'm also a 26-year city resident, and I have 2 children that graduated from the St. Louis Public Schools. The district is certainly on the move. As everyone knows, we regained accreditation in 2017 after 10 years. We were able to have a tax levy increase in 2016, which was the first one in 25 years. We are not anti-development, but a growing, thriving city is in everyone's best interest, and a thriving school district clearly is a part of that equation. You can. So this is the agenda, short agenda for today. I'm kind of that numbers junkie, so there'll be quite a few numbers on here. So the district is doing some great things, but resources continue to be a great concern for us, and we just want to make sure that TIF and tax abatement decisions and guidelines are, thoughtful and considerate of the district as well. So I'll be presenting some key financials and metrics so you can better understand the district. And I know that Alderman Rhodey and I talked about these as an annual thing. So what I'll be presenting today may not be the final. We might need to tweak some things here or there. But all of the information that I'll be presenting is from the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education. So it's a bit public information available on their website. It's based on our audited financials. So it isn't just my information, and it's information that all 580 districts in Missouri have to submit. So here come the numbers. I know that this is really hard to see, but this is our basic school finance report, and it includes our most important financial information all in one document. And this includes information for the last 5 fiscal years. How many students we have, how much we're spending, where our revenue comes from, what our assessed valuation is, and our tax rates. The majority of our revenue is local, and it's overwhelmingly from property tax revenue. Sales taxes are a distant second. So we're very TIF and tax abatement sensitive. You'll note at the bottom in red, it says that our local revenues are overstated and our state revenues are understated, and that's due to the way that the state funds charter schools, which are a part of the city. So basically, St. Louis Public Schools receives all of the property and sales taxes. So what DESE does is they reduce our state revenue to make sure that the charter schools receive their fair appropriation of local tax revenues. So that's where the kind of the overstatement and understatement of revenues comes from. This is just a picture of the enrollment for St. Louis Public Schools and charter schools over the last 6 years. It's been pretty consistent over, between 33 and 34,000 students. Of course, there have been some shifts in enrollment between the district and charter schools. On the previous screen, it talks about average daily attendance, which is very related to enrollment. It just really is how often are those children coming to school. So on average, I believe last fiscal year, overall, for St. Louis Public Schools, it was about 93.5% of the time. So if you multiply that percentage times the enrollment, you come up with the average daily attendance.
No, Angie, forgive me to interrupt you. Do you have a second copy of that? Because while you're making the presentation, I could have somebody over make a copy, and I
do.
think that might be helpful for some of the committee members. Terrence, how about if you do that, and I'll go ahead and advance the slides for it.
Thank you.
Don't let him operate this.
So this next slide is just based on the 2016 fiscal year comparison district data. And some of the districts that I selected to put on this slide are because some are similar in size to our district, some of the student demographics are similar, and then some are just of very special interest, so like the Ladus and Claytons. The biggest reporting difference between the district and the county districts is special education students. In the county, there's SSD, Special School District, and they support all of the county's special education students. Well, for St. Louis Public, we support our special education students, so all of those financials are in our data. Special education students represent about 16% of our population. And you can note on the slide the SSD expenditures per ADA, and I'll just try to read this to you. SSD has 3,569 students. And their current expenditures per ADA is about $192,000. St. Louis Public Schools, our enrollment last year was about 22,500. And our current expenditures per ADA was about $15,350. So of the 22,500 students, we supported about 3,600 special education students. That's about the same population that SSD supported. So that's a big difference you can see just in the expenditures. The local revenue percent really is a measure of affluence. The higher your local revenue percentage, typically the more affluent your district is. And you can see that from the chart. Clayton's local revenue is about 95%, Ladue 94%, and you can compare that to a Riverview Gardens at 26%, Jennings 30%, Normandy, 34%. St. Louis Public Schools local percent seems relatively high at 64%, but again, that's because our local revenues are overstated due to the way that the charter schools are funded. Our assessed valuation in 2016 was about $4.2 billion. About $270 million was in TIF assessments. And based on our operating tax rate for that year, that was about $10 million in revenue that the school district didn't receive. And that would equate to about 150 teachers. Okay, you can advance. So when we talk about, and I'm on slide 6 right now, When we talk about local tax effort, this slide just really shows the different taxes that make up our local effort. The majority are property taxes. You can see number 6 under total local taxes, that's our sales tax portion, about $28 million. And that's where I talk about how we're much more property tax sensitive. So again, you can see that our local effort per ADA, which is kind of like per student, is about $7,300. Here again is the local tax effort per average daily attendance for those comparison districts. St. Louis Public, which includes the charter schools down at the bottom in red. Over the last couple years, you can just get a sense of how much property tax revenue that we're spending per student versus the comparison districts. And of course, the more tax revenue we have, there's more funding for highly qualified staff, programming, technology, and the list goes on and on.
I'm sorry. You're saying that's how much is spent per pupil? To go back to the slide, would you turn, like that in 2017, $7,299? I mean,
Yes.
That's per pupil.
Yes, and that's just the tax revenue. We have other revenue as well.
And in Clayton, it's spending $17,000?
Yes. Now remember that they have a much higher percentage of tax revenue, so yes.
But it's fair to say that they spend more per child than we do.
Well, they have more revenue per child to spend, yes.
Okay. It doesn't mean that they're actually spending it per child. It's just that they have more revenue per child.
This is actually based on their financials that were submitted to the Department of so this is what they actually spent per child.
The reason I ask is for years people will say St. Louis Public spends a large amount of money per pupil compared to other districts. So that's why I'm looking at that going, they're spending
So
more.
Alderman, this is the local effort, and see, there was a previous slide that shows the total effort.
Okay.
And if you go back a slide or two now, the biggest misnomer is, which is a striking one when you take a look at it, is that they have a special school district out there that segregates all those costs. And their cost per child out there is
$92,000 or so.
$192,000. We have as many special needs children in the city of
Yes.
almost as many.
Yes.
In the city of St. Louis, and that number is kind of lost, in these. So as a result, it artificially inflates the amount that we're spending on a per student basis, which is demonstrated, I think, it's on one of these slides here. Oh, yeah, it's on slide 5, Alden. So our total expenditure is $15,347.
That's per student.
That's per
Yes.
student, and then you can see Clayton up at the top was $18,020. But see, lost in that is that we don't segregate our costs associated with special needs children.
I guess, but what's ADA?
The average daily attendance, that's, basically your enrollment times your attendance percentage.
That's where I think I got lost on that. Okay, thank you.
So on slide 8, this is just a comparison of the average salaries for our district as compared to the state as a whole for the past 5 years. And the graphic at the top really shows the average salary for the state going up and the district coming down over the last few years. Part of that is because we're losing staff all the time because of non-competitive pay. Our staff can go to county districts and receive better compensation. So that also impacts our average experience because we are constantly bringing in newer teachers. Here is the average pay for the comparison districts. You can see St. Louis Public Schools at the bottom in red, and we lose great staff to these districts all the time. We also have a fantastic foundation that provides resources for our certified staff, including tuition assistance, up to a lifetime total of $30,000. So many of our teachers and administrators receive their master's and doctoral degrees with funding from the Parsons Blewett Memorial Foundation. Unfortunately, after not all, but many of these staff, after they get these advanced degrees, will leave the district and go out to counties where they can receive better pay. So, we say sometimes that we're, educating much of the region just because of our foundation. And over the past 10 years, the foundation has awarded close to 5,000 scholarships totaling over $10 million. So the voters passed a levy increase, and many people think, well, that's enough, but it's really not. It's just a start. We still have so much to make up. This slide depicts our fund balance, which is kind of like your checkbook balance, if you will. According to DESE, you have to have a minimum 3% of your prior year expenditures so that you're not determined to be financially distressed, which we were for many, many years. 3% for St. Louis Public Schools is about $11 million. $11 million might sound like a lot, but it only represents about 2 weeks of payroll. We have a board policy that has a fund balance goal of 10%, but ideally we would have closer to 20%. And you can see how some of the other districts are 20% and beyond. This really helps to ensure that funding shortfalls and any unexpected challenges don't interrupt our daily operations. So that's all I really prepared for this morning. If anyone has any questions, I'd certainly be happy to.
I keep referring to you as Angie. I hope you don't mind.
That's who I am.
I feel like we've gotten to know each other a little bit over the last few months. Not to say that this is going to solve all your problems, but from a standpoint, a historical perspective, we passed a new tax last year, and then I think you got full funding from the state this year for the first time for the formula or whatever it is. Is that correct?
For the current year, no. Now for next year, fiscal year 18, it's the allocation is for full funding.
Okay.
So I mean, we've been getting, I guess, a little bit closer each year. So what will that mean for us next year? Maybe an additional $1 million to $1.5 million.
Is that it?
Yes.
Oh my gosh, I thought it was going to be more than that. So if we were sitting here as a board and we were wanting to develop policies that the thing that we should probably focus on, that we're supportive of the schools, are the thing that we want to probably track more than anything else is our local effort.
Yes.
Would you agree?
Yes.
And then just as a comment, a thought, if going forward, there are changes, when we have a good year, I want to make sure that the resources of the city are available for us to understand better what's happening so that we can provide you the analytics necessary for you to understand so that you can in turn explain to us. By that, I mean, if we do have a pop in revenue one year, what caused that? Is it a result of tax passage? Is it a result of projects coming off of tax abatement? Is it a result of changes in assessed value? So that we begin understanding going forward what's contributing, or vice versa. If it's bad news, why is it bad news? Does that, if that's appropriate, and I will gladly work with you and the collector's office to get that information. I've started doing some of that. I think there's a lot of things that we can learn from this. We can break out year-to-year changes by ward, relatively easy. We could probably in time do that by neighborhood. As we start getting the new FASB rule that's coming in, we're going to start getting much better information on the amount of incentives that we're granting right now. We can't even project what's rolling off. How much revenue is being lost as a result of tax abatement. TIF stuff we actually collect, so we know how much we're losing from that. So we'll be able to, going forward, start developing better analytics to understand this so that you or anybody can have a better opportunity of digging in and actually understanding it. Is there a way to carve out the special needs? Is that impossible for us to get an idea of what our per child expenditure is for special needs children, or?
Well, no, it's not impossible. It just takes a little bit more.
Okay. My deal with Angie was that we wouldn't eat up a huge amount of staff time and require her to hire somebody special just to do these things. So most of this stuff is currently available. The reason I say that is on our committee here is the alderwoman from the 2nd Ward, who is chairman of our health committee. And I would suspect that there's a huge linkage between special needs children and prenatal education. And if we were going to spend money in health care, preventive health care in the city, that could be something that we should all kind of be thinking about. The last comment I have to make before I open it up to questions on the committee was we're obviously very concerned about issues of equity lens. We did kind of macro analysis today. Is there anything in your thought process that, in your mind, that might aid us in that we should be looking at, or numbers that we should be focusing on?
From an equity lens? Mm-hmm. Well, I can tell you that that's something that the district is very focused on now, and especially with some of the federal mandates that are coming down for us. The Every Student Succeeds Act will be required to report at a much lower level in order to show equity. It's been a discussion for years. We have different types of schools, magnet schools versus choice schools, and all our schools being treated equitably. So we're looking much closer at that as we try to determine how we will be able to report to meet some of those requirements. So that's certainly on the table right now.
Okay. Again, we're not policy setters, but if there's something from our perspective that we should be, watching or trying to develop a measure of, we would certainly appreciate your suggestions. I'm going to go ahead and open it up. I think I saw Alderman Kennedy present. Alderman, do you have any questions of?
No questions, thank you.
Alderwoman Flowers?
I just have one. Your enrollment numbers, does that also include those that are in like AMI and?
They do. The enrollment numbers here are just kindergarten through 12th, so they do not include our preschool population,
Okay.
which we have about 1,900 preschoolers.
Okay, thank you. That's all I have.
Alderman Boyd.
Yes, thank you, Ms. Banks.
I have several questions. Number one, if there's a city-county merger, how would that affect SLPS as far as special school district?
Well, that's a good question. I guess I haven't really pondered that. I don't know.
Okay.
I don't know.
Something to kind of think about as the conversation is starting to become elevated in a move to maybe want to do that, and hopefully in the next decade, maybe.
Yeah, I mean, with the school districts being separate, taxing districts, if you will, if there was a city-county merger, I don't know that it would have a large impact on the school districts, but that's a interesting question.
You made reference to, and I think the foundation is phenomenal, and in support of the teachers getting higher education. Is there a requirement after degree completion that they would stay X amount of years?
There is not in the trust documents, so we're really looking at that to see if there's anything we can do to encourage our staff to make some type of a commitment. So that's something that the attorneys are looking at.
Yeah, because that is disappointing. And we see it with the police department. We hire them and we give them the best training, and then after a while, but I think they have to stay a few years or something like that. It's before they move to like a county police department. I may have missed it, but about how much money would the new tax levy generate that we just passed recently?
About $26 million.
$26 million?
Yes.
Okay. On page 6, it says delinquent taxes. What does that mean?
Well, just basically taxpayers, whether it's individuals or businesses, not paying on time. So there is
Okay, so this is a catch-up.
Yes.
Line. Okay, got
Yes.
you. And then what is M&M surtax?
Merchants and manufacturers, so it's a tax on.
I got you. I'm real curious. Talk a little bit more about what you guys are going to do from the equity standpoint, because you talked about the choice school, magnet school, and other school. And as a parent within the St. Louis public school system, I was fortunate that our daughter was able to attend Kennard in preschool. What I found fascinating was the basic difference in the curriculum was they taught preschoolers kindergarten work and so on and so forth. So they were always teaching them a grade higher. And I always thought, why can't we do that at almost every school? Why are we limiting kids to something more basic than challenging them to something more rigid?
Well,
So when you look at this racial equity standpoint that you mentioned, what are you really looking to do?
Well, I guess I'll say that, first of all, depending on which school you're looking at, there are different funding sources depending on the population of students. So in the higher poverty schools, there are more entitlement funds, and oftentimes in the higher poverty schools, there's a lot more catch-up work for the students that enter into the school. We do have pull-out gifted teachers in some of those schools as well. I certainly understand what you're talking about, but again, funding always is a concern. But from the equity standpoint, what I think is going to happen is more of a normalization across the schools over time in order to make sure that the resources that reach each of the schools, there will be more parity. So it'll be a process, but I hope that's what's going to happen over time.
Well, thank you. I want the record to show I am a proud parent of St. Louis Public Schools, and I'm excited about the full accreditation, and you guys do a good job under the circumstances, so thank you so much.
Thank you.
Alderwoman Davis, a former school board member, has no questions. Okay. Alderman Kotar.
No questions.
Alderman Ogilvy is not present today. Alderwoman Boyd had to be excused. She had her husband she had to take to the hospital. Alderman Bosley, do you have any questions?
No, sir, no questions.
Alderman Oldenburg.
Yeah, just a couple. Thank you so much for being here and for this presentation. Can you real quickly walk me through, it's at the bottom of one of these slides, but you said percentage of local revenue is understated and the state percentage is overstated as a result of the charter formula. Can you just quickly explain why or how that is
Yes.
to me? Thank you.
So for our
Slide
district,
3, I'm sorry.
we say that our local revenue is overstated and state revenue is understated. St. Louis Public Schools receives all of the local effort, so all of the property taxes and all of the sales taxes directly. We don't flow any of that money to the charter schools for their allocation. So the state, which flows money directly to the charter schools, will reduce our state allocation to really take our, just reduce our state revenue to flow to the charters for their local portion.
Understand.
So,
When I was looking at the numbers, Alderman, I think for purposes of being concise, Angie and I talked about this. She wanted to go ahead and use the numbers as reported at the state, but if you wanted to get a quick approximation, you would add the two enrollments together, divide the charter,
Yeah.
that'd be a third, so you'd end up taking a third of the local, which is, I figure our local contribution equalized is about 40-some-odd%.
Oh, is it? Okay.
Instead of 60.
Instead of
because
the
about-
64.
Yeah.
Okay.
About
That's what I was trying to get at. Okay. Thank you for that clarification.
any other questions, Alderman?
No, that was it. Thank you.
These things are like an onion, I always say. Anytime you start looking at these numbers, you can peel them and, always look deeper and deeper and find out more. Some of the other opportunities or challenges for us is, this is kind of a staggering number if you took a look at it this way. I had Jonathan Ferry run this number for me. We estimate that our average household real estate tax, this is pre the recent assessment, so that's was about $900 per household, which means that the schools would get about 60% of that. So our average household is only contributing about $540 to the local effort of over $7,000. So what that means is, how are we doing that? About half of the money in the city from real estate taxes are being paid by commercial property owners. And then, of course, our ratio of households to children has an impact on that. And then other opportunities that are out there, about 1 out of 3 sales tax dollars leave the city. And I don't know if it's in this report here, but sales tax is the second largest source of revenue for the school district. So the more sales taxes that we can generate within the city, obviously we get a bigger capture from that. So some benefit from that as well. Is there any other questions of Angie? No?
I had
Sure. Oh, okay. Angie, thanks so much. We really appreciate this, and we're trying to compile a whole bunch of other stuff and eventually put this in a report, but really appreciate the time you've invested in that, and look forward to hearing from you next year.
all right, thank you.
What is your fiscal year?
June 30.
June 30th. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I was just thinking, as we look at creative ways to structure different development deals with the community benefit agreement and so on and so forth, is there a way to get an agreement with a developer? Let's say there's a TIF project whereby they would send whatever that tax that could have gone to the St. Louis Public Schools, they would send it directly as part of their development agreement.
They would send it.
They would cut a check every year to St. Louis Public Schools. Let's say it's, for the sake of simplicity, they're saving, they're getting $10,000. That's how much SLPS is losing, $10,000 a year. So the developer would send a $10,000 check over the life of the TIF.
Well, I think the way we do that is we just reduce the amount of TIF.
Well, then we could potentially play semantics, though, because we could say, well, we want a $10 million TIF, but then we'll just, give you a $9 million TIF. That way we have a
Yeah, I
savings,
think
but they
there's-
may not need the $10 million to begin with.
I think there's a little bit of a misnomer about the reason we spent much of last year on developing this formula. So, or what we did for the new members of the committee, we first tried to quantify the amount of incentives that were out there. Then we hired a financial analyst with the goal of developing a model to see if we're making money on a project and how much money we're actually making. So we spent much of the last 6 months or so trying to understand the model. Now, the idea is if a project, if the model's working and we're doing a good job negotiating or whatever, there shouldn't be extra money in the project. So in an ideal world, what you would do is you would give the last dollar necessary to get the project done that makes money, but not a dollar more than that. If you give a dollar more than that, then what's happening is we're providing more incentive. What the community benefit agreements do is say, go ahead and provide more money to the developer, but then when the developer gets that more money, then we go back and tell them to do something else with it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I could see how that would work.
So, there's, community benefit agreements, it's kind of a good buzz thing, and there's, some, we've been using them in the 17th Ward for a number of years for a whole bunch of different reasons in different ways. We've been using them on large projects in a variety of different ways as well. We've been requiring, minority participation in contracting. Then we began taking a look at workforce development issues, and then first source hiring agreements. So all those have been starting to, in a way, those are elements of a community benefit agreement. Then other elements of it is okay, well, Mr. Developer, if you're going to get $5 million of incentives, well, let's go ahead and take 10 or 20% of that and, do something else with that money. And that might be investments in a park, it might be investments in infrastructure, it might be some units for affordable housing. So there's a whole, but one way or another, it's still coming away from the other taxing districts that would have gotten it without the community benefit.
Well, let me ask you this, then I'm going to let someone else speak. But so one of the things that troubles me sometime when we do the TIF agreements is the developer's fee. And the developer fee is a certain percentage of the overall development. And it's based on a percentage of $10 million. So if it's a $10 million, your development fee is X. If it's $30 million, the development fee is X. Do we limit, or will we be looking at limiting the developer's fee based on percentage, but not more than X?
Yeah, Barb Geisman used to look very closely at that when she was in the mayor's office, and that is looked at, or it's part of the calculation that Jonathan looks at when he does it. Frequently, the developer fee is computed as, an equity contribution. So, but
Okay.
It is something that they look at in every project that comes through for a TIF.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
just to add to the question that was asked by Alderman Boyd, in the past, we have done exactly what you suggested. When I was sitting on the TIF Commission, we had some projects that we were very much in favor of, but we also were going through a period of time right when we ended the DSEC settlement, where we lost almost $100 million out of the school budget, and we were required to cut that budget by $78 million. And so we knew that we couldn't lose any money at that period of time, and so we asked that those developers pay that money upfront and make sure that the school district was not in harm based on that development. So that can happen. Probably shouldn't happen, but it can happen. One of the things that we have to pay closer attention to and I want to say it was 2 or 3 years ago. We need to do an annual to see how much money is coming back on the rolls for the school district as TIFs are being paid off. In most instances, most of them are paid off extremely early, and so that's a benefit to us as well. But I wouldn't want to get into a practice of that, because then you have a hard time on discerning which project that should be and which shouldn't. But it can be done.
As I said, I think earlier, we're going to, with the new FASB requirements, I think we're going to end up eventually getting the ability to do a lot more analytics on these things, and you know, which is part of the meeting here. I'm going to pass this out, and I didn't have a chance to proofread. This is all screwed up. So, you know, I need to, I ran out of time last night, so I didn't get a chance. But I want to kind of walk us through this, and we're going to get to those board bills in just a couple minutes. But I wanted to begin thinking a little bit about this as we move forward. And I always feel like I'm in a monologue in this meeting. I do all the talking, and it's really meant to be interactive. But I've handed these things out so that it gives you an opportunity to begin thinking about them, so that we aren't making any decisions necessarily today. But on these 3 points that we made, you know, that I made earlier, and again, these are my observations. We're certainly open to them. But if you get back to the idea of increasing in values are pushing out less affluent minority residents, less affluent / minority residents, and changing the composition of the neighborhood and the issues of gentrification. I really don't think, I think gentrification is actually good, and it's necessary, and it's a requirement if we don't have growing property values. What I did is I tried to walk us through a couple of these points for a couple minutes, and again, this is, the first 1 or 2 are okay, but then we end up losing it. But increasing values are pushing less affluent / minority residents and changing the composition of the neighborhood. That's kind of the argument, and then, or the issue that we heard. Now, I think there's, a lot of these issues are two-sided, and I kind of want to walk through some of them and then give you an idea of what we possibly have. You know, the good and the bad of rising values is development costs versus market values. If you have your development costs are higher than your market values, you're not going to get investment in the neighborhood. You need to have growing property values to attract investment. New wealthier residents can reduce the over-impaction of poverty. At least in my reading of many of the issues, is if you have an, you know, too many low-income residents in an area, you know, that creates some problems as well, and they have economic diversity in an area is a good thing. Low-income renters are priced out. Well, obviously that's a concern. Reinvestment brings jobs. When you have a lot of activity and new retailing and everything, that'll bring jobs closer to the area. Reduces upside-down mortgages, increases household net worth and home mobility. You know, one of the studies that I read regarding the recent economic downturn in 2008 was the tremendous impact that declining property values had in lower income areas and what that did to household net worth. Higher values mean less subsidy. Owners win these situations, the owners win, long-term owners win, but renters lose. Businesses serving lower income residents leave, and we've had this situation over in Forest Park Southeast. Things like laundromats and businesses that are kind of targeted them, they lose their constituency, they leave, and behind are left residents who don't have access to those types of services. Higher values help household net worth, but they increase the taxes. So, you know, in Forest Park Southeast, many of our long-term property owners over there were actually African-American women of modest incomes now, and their taxes are going up even though their home values are up. But the flip side of that is better services mean higher values. I mean, when you solve problems, make neighborhood services better, you're going to end up with higher values. Higher values mean higher taxes. More taxes mean better services. So you have this kind of circle. And so how do we, you know, none of our things, those are kind of the good and the bad of it. None of the proposals that are in here really address that. Any of those, any of the downsides. What are we doing for lower income residents or anything like that? Now, that was a concern that was expressed. Our incentive program said, oh, that's causing the problem, and nothing that we're recommending necessarily deals with that. Am I making any sense if you read through those? Now, some of that is I don't think we can really deal with all of those things by adjusting our incentive program. I think that we as a committee, from what I've heard from you, is that most of you, I think, want growing property values because that means more people want to live in your neighborhood. What we don't want to do is the downside of that. And so what are the possible solutions? Now, that's not being dealt with in this document that we have before us, right? Mm-hmm. None of that's being dealt with in this resolution. But we are dealing with it in other aspects of what, of our city government. One is that we, and these are possible solutions that we can have. Can we include affordable housing components? That's, there's groups out there advocating that we do that. Increase economic opportunity for long-term residents. Well, we're doing that, I think, with some of the community benefit agreements that Alderman Kennedy and Davis and others have negotiated for us in the past. We're going ahead and say, if you do construction, we want you to go ahead and begin tracking the number of city residents that are working on the sites. We want you to begin hiring, use First Source, Michael Holmes' operation, a slate, as a source of what you're doing. Provide tax relief for long-time property owners. We're doing that. The state of Missouri does that in the form of a circuit breaker. So, maybe one of the things that we begin looking at is the number of residents that are currently using that. Provide economic benefit for displaced residents. Anytime we do forced location, we're certainly doing that. Improve mobility. I mean, if somebody gets moved out of a neighborhood and they're living in the neighborhood because it's close to their job, the better job we do with mass transit and affordable transportation, we're helping ameliorate the problem that is caused by that. And of course, much of our block grant money and low-income tax credit programs and things like that are being done to provide affordable housing for those folks so that they can stand behind it. We did a great deal of that, I know, in Forest Park Southeast and the Central West End in anticipation of the development. What we'll be doing next week is we will be having, and I haven't seen the latest report, I've seen preliminary ones, but we will be getting CDA to come in and begin developing for us some of the same performance measures we saw today from the school system, but this would be the number of affordable housing units that are being generated relative to the total number of housing units that are being generated. And that's just going to be one component of this. I think eventually we want to take a look at, household net worth of city residents, employment, average income, and things like that. I don't know how much of that they're going to have access to when they get before us next week, but eventually that would be our goal, is to begin developing those performance measures that we could go ahead and include in this report so that we can actually begin having a thoughtful discussion about all these topics with real data in front of us. Is that making sense to everyone?
Yeah.
Yes, Alderwoman from the 19th.
Mr. Chairman, I'm very much in tune with what you're saying. One of the things I was hoping we could do, we're trying to do an awful lot in-house, and we don't necessarily always have enough time or staff and or experience to get us to where we're trying to go. And I would like to ask that if they're not already at the table, that we have like a urban strategist or someone who has been in this game a long time and understands what it means to develop a community, most especially making sure that it has the diversity and everything else. And I say that because I just viewed a topic discussion on this, and it talked about how we develop communities under like Hope 6. It has a different title now. But when we went into those communities, we did a lot of upfront work before that development was agreed upon. And so we actually talked to each household. We looked at their income levels. We looked at their education, all of that. And I give you a very good, for instance, because I worked with it, when we did Renaissance Place, the people who lived in Blue Mire, what we found was we had a lot of people who could afford to buy homes, who wanted to buy homes, but nobody had ever given them, they just didn't know where to start. You also had people who wanted to live in a different type of setting, not necessarily in an apartment complex like we were building. And, you know, it was just so many things that you could actually help people with. And when you talk about using the word gentrification, you don't know why always some people leave a particular area. It may have been a reason why they were ready to leave, and it gave them an opportunity to leave. And so those are the kinds of things that you need to look at when you're talking about these larger developments. And so what we ended up with in Renaissance was wraparound social services for 5 years after the development was done. Plus, we help people start saving accounts, buy homes, go back to school, become, some of them were underemployed. So there's a whole lot that can be done. And when we keep throwing this word around gentrification, and I look at the city of St. Louis, and I look at every ward and its population, you really can't use that word anymore, because we have a diverse city in every single ward of the city. And we need to look at some other things and stop with the, as a matter of fact, let me take that word back out of my brain. So we need to look at how we can really help people and stabilize people, but it's really not about gentrification. People have chosen to live in every part of this city for various reasons, and nobody's stopping anybody, nor is anybody hindered for any reason. We have affordable housing, we have public housing, and we have market rate housing that fits anybody's need in this city.
Well, if I could respond two different ways on two things. One is it's ironic that you should mention urban strategies. They're developing, Esther Shen is doing the Choice Neighborhood Program.
Okay.
And they have a whole collection of metrics that they're using to determine their success. And of course, she's working very closely with Alana over in CDA. So I've asked Alana to try to take a look at what Esther's doing from their standpoint of reporting to the federal government on the success of the Choice Neighborhood, and whether or not some of that data might be appropriate to share with us and use in our performance report. So, the idea would be is we might be able to tag on to some of their work that they're doing over there, and we can kind of start taking a look at that on the macro level. And then with regard to the gentrification, I think it's everybody's, ideal solution is that not to move people. The ideal solution would be for some of our lower income neighborhoods to actually have increased opportunity, and therefore not necessarily need to afford, need to live in subsidized housing. So, that's where I think we all want to end up with. I think everybody would agree that that's the ideal solution. Of course, that doesn't happen overnight, and of course, that's a dream scenario. We need to be cognizant of, those who won't be able to participate or have those opportunities. And so, the last thing here is I list a few possible solutions, but then is how do we measure? And that's what I think we're looking forward to, for input in, not only, possible solutions, but how we begin measuring those. But in any event, on this particular one, how do we go ahead and diminish the impacts of gentrification? I don't think anything in our report, any of the suggestions that were made by SLDC address any of those particular issues. If you kind of read through it, most of them are talking about cutting back. Well, let's read the next one here. Some homeowners and businesses aren't paying enough in taxes, and some projects are getting too much incentives. Well, if you read all of their recommendations, they talk about, guideline reviews and stuff like that, but almost all of them, they're all talking about reducing the amount of property taxes. So almost all of them are addressing the idea, B on our list. Some homeowners and businesses aren't paying enough so I didn't really see anything in there that particularly addressed, how to diminish the impacts of gentrification. The other things that it addresses a little bit is how some neighborhoods are not getting enough development, and that's only done peripherally, and that is done by reducing, the incentives in what I termed as kind of the hot neighborhoods vis-a-vis those less hot neighborhoods by using the market value analysis. So in other words, hey, if a neighborhood's really doing well, we'll cut the incentives down here, but we'll leave them stay up where they are in the other neighborhoods. Does that make sense? Anyway, that was kind of the context that I put these things in. I wanted to go ahead and lay that out now. This is the type of stuff that you don't want to make a snap decision on. Take that, kind of digest it a little bit. We'll talk a little bit more about it next week. I'll have some more time to think about it. If you feel strongly about something or that I said today, or if you want to add something, let me know. I'll try to, we'll try to come back next week, and then maybe we can talk about these issues. I don't think we're going to be able to address all of the things that we're, I think we need to do something now on an interim basis, and some of the other things will shake out as time goes on if we start developing performance models, if we have a business plan for the city and so forth. But any other comments or anything?
Sure. Mr. Chairman, thank you for your analysis of these issues, but help me connect the dots from this to this.
So what I was,
Where these statements
I guess
come
what I was
from.
saying is those are my interpretation of comments that I heard at the meeting or have, informal conversations. And my sense is the frustration that I hear from people is, hey, gentrification type of concerns. The second concern is the idea of fairness. I'm paying my taxes, somebody else isn't paying enough in taxes, and that's hurting our ability to provide education or whatever. And then the third area of concern is all the incentives are being used in one part of the city, and there's great development going on there, but other parts of the city aren't getting any development. And so if you kind of boil down most of the complaints that I've heard, I think they fall into one of those three categories. That's me, and that's why I'm sitting here and I'm trying to ask you if you disagree with that or if that's...
Well, the only thing that I'm kind of challenged with, I'm clear on the question, the issues, the good and the bad, but the possible solutions, I'm not sure if it's fair in a public process that we create the possible solutions without asking in a public forum what the citizens think the possible solutions would be. So I'm kind of uncomfortable with just taking this, which would be in my head, the same things I would have probably come up with similar stuff, but when it comes from the community, then I think it gives more credibility.
I agree with you. These weren't meant to be part of this was meant to stimulate discussion amongst ourselves. It wasn't meant to be attached to a resolution or anything else.
Okay.
This was just the framework that I was thinking about this in. And I'm not even, this is all new for me too. So we're
So we'll be going back to the community to ask for the possible solutions?
The tours already.
Because if we don't do that,
I think in time we're going
quality
to...
of this process is not going to be...
I think in time I fully expect that the business, as they do develop their economic development plan, they will be having some of those. I think what we do over here is somewhat independent, and I guess part of the reason I laid this out for you is and maybe we should do this offline, but if you have some ideas on what you think is the best way to go forward, let me know. The goal was to try to get something done on an interim basis before we go down This, I think, are kind of longer-term types of things that we need to be thinking about, a year or a year and a half from now. Not that we shouldn't be doing our work right now. That's why we're having all these people come in with their performance measures, is we're trying to start figuring some of these things out. But if you have some ideas, perhaps you can talk offline with me and we can kind of think about what the best pattern is. Right now, I'm looking for feedback from committee members.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Chairman,
So, go ahead.
Yes, Alder.
CDA is coming when?
Next Wednesday, and for folks, that is the 5th of July, which is the day after the 4th of July. So it'll be like a Monday on a Wednesday.
Mr. Chairman, so this is all a part of our goal going towards having a planning process in place and looking at where we should be providing incentives and at what level.
Yeah, I think long-term, or kind of intermediate term, the idea is to have a SLDC find somebody to help them develop a economic development plan for the city. And then on an interim basis, what we all are going to be trying to do over the next year or so is kind of refine some of our thinking on this, come up with some performance measures that we think are kind of important. So if we have an economic development plan for the city, it should be doing a couple things. And those things are creating the economic viability of our city. In other words, we'll actually at some point get the budget director in here and we'll start trying to understand how that works, and improving the economic well-being of our residents, which is why we're having CDA come in the schools. So those are the two, if that's our mission, those are the two areas that we should be thinking about. Are we improving, the lot of our residents, and how are we impacting the economic viability of our city? And are these policies that we're putting in place actually working or not? And, tied into all that will be the new FASB rules, so that we should be starting to get better analytics. Right now, trying to get, good numbers from the city is very, very hard.
I just hope some reality falls in here somewhere, because it is going to require some very high incentives to get some development done in some parts of our city. Most people don't understand the liabilities that are attached to these developments sometimes, just simply the cost of their insurance and everything else just to work in the area. Nevertheless, making sure that you can even meet any of the goals that we put on these folks. It's just so much that comes with that, and I don't think a lot of people understand that.
Well, I think the point of this, Alderwoman, I agree with you. Right now, we've had a fair amount of development proposals in the city. I mean, I can see some of the projects that we dealt with last session falling out of bed. I was at a Cortex board meeting yesterday. Cortex, which is supposedly the hottest spot in town. I mean, two of our projects are, we've lost the financing on two different projects over there in the last couple weeks. It is very, very difficult to get these things done. And we're in a region that's competing not only against the suburbs, but we're competing against another state, right across the border from us. So that's why we need to understand, even better how we make money and how we're spending money, and it's an extremely competitive situation. I know that some projects in the 17th Ward can happen without subsidy, and they are happening.
Absolutely.
I'm pretty sure we've probably done more unsubsidized development than the whole rest
I know
of the
I
city.
have,
Probably close to the rest of the city put together. But there are some projects that absolutely will not move forward without it, and we need to make sure that we're understanding the differentiation between the two of them, and we need to make sure that the ones that we are subsidizing are what we really want to subsidize, and that we're making money off of that, and we're not subsidizing them, we're going to not lose money on them or anything else. So that's why we spent so much time the last 6 or 9 months developing the model that John Ferry has, and I think it's a fairly sophisticated model there's a lot of tweaking that needs to be done with it, but I think it's in a much stronger position than where we were. So we've talked quite a bit today. I'm sorry. I feel like I have a monologue every meeting. Alderman from the 22nd, I would encourage you to sit, if you want to, meet after one of the board sessions or something. I would appreciate the opportunity to kind of brainstorm where we are now and where we need to go.
Sure.
All right, well, that concludes that resolution in the school board presentation. We'll now take up Board Bill number
90.
Alderman Bosley's Board Bill number 90. Alderman, take the dais.
Did you adopt?
No, we're not going to adopt it yet. We're going to let it cook for a while.
Good afternoon, everybody. Is it afternoon? Good morning?
Morning still.
All right, feels like the afternoon. Good morning.
Good morning.
Thank you. This board bill is about an ordinance, and we are trying to repeal the development plans that were made in maybe over 30 years ago. Well, not maybe, over 30 to 50 years ago. We've got one from 1966 and another from 1983. And these ordinances were never implemented. It was for it was for a development plan in these areas. One of the ordinance numbers was 54425. And I'll read some remarks on it. In the past, there have been a number of attempts to redevelop the area just north of the Pruitt-Igoe site after urban renewal areas were approved for Mill Creek Valley at the west end. The 1966 ordinance 54425 was approved for the Malamfi redevelopment area bounded by Cass, Jefferson, Madison, and 22nd Street. The application was made to HUD for funding but was never approved, and the project did not proceed. And the following ordinances, 58949 in 1983, there was a plan by the Industrial Expansion Authority to develop an industrial park in Montgomery. That also did not come to fruition. The last ordinance there is number 63534, which in 1995 there was a plan approved for the Madison Acres, and it's bounded by 25th Street. It's kind of north of Benton, 22nd Street and Madison Lane. That plan called for new and rehabilitated single-family houses, but it was never implemented also. So we want to repeal these ordinances in lieu of the NGA so they can start new development and working on new plans with the community.
Okay. Alderman Kennedy is stepped out. Alderman Flowers has stepped out. Alderman Boyd, do you have any questions?
No questions.
Alderwoman Davis, any questions?
No questions.
Alderman Kotar?
No questions.
Alderman Oldenburg?
No questions.
Okay. Hearing no questions, do we still have a quorum? Let's see. We do not have a quorum.
We got 6.
We need to
I'm
get,
at 5, you need 6.
we 3 plus,
We got 6.
we got our 6.
Oh, sorry.
I'm here.
We get to count him.
All right, count me in.
Okay, if there are no questions of the sponsor, the chair will entertain a motion.
I'll move that we pass Board Bill 90 out of committee with a due pass recommendation.
Second.
Been moved and seconded. Madam Clerk, call the roll.
Alderman Kennedy, Alderwoman Flowers, Alderman Boyd,
Aye.
Alderwoman Davis,
Aye.
Alderman Kotar,
Aye.
Alderman Ogilvy, Alderwoman Boyd, Alderman Bosley,
Aye.
Alderman Oldenburg,
Aye.
Chairman Rhodey.
Aye.
6 aye votes do pass.
Okay.
Thank you very much, and I appreciate the opportunity, everybody.
I think that concludes our business today. I'll entertain a motion that we adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. We adjourn. All in favor?
Previous roll.
All right. Thank you.